members of the House would have been thankful that we enjoyed good weather for the last 2 weeks. And with the haze lifted, Singaporeans could breathe fresh and healthy air once again. 2 Saturdays ago, the Gardens of the Bay held their first anniversary celebration. It was June 29th. More than 10,000 people turned up. It was held in the open. Just imagine if the PSI that day had shot up, the disappointment if the event had to be cancelled. Good fresh air, clean environment. This is the Singapore that we treasure and have worked hard to build. A home with clear skies, clean air, and beautiful green spaces for us and our loved ones to enjoy. But the haze reminds us that in our interconnected world, even the clean air we breathe cannot be taken for granted. Events far away can impact us here with great consequences. You remember SARS and H1N1, H5N1. And we realize how animal husbandry practices in other countries. Fascinating to read how close intermingling of different species facilitated viruses to mutate. Viruses jumping from one animal species to another, and then finally to humans, to seed global pandemics. Well, the recent haze was carried by winds from the smoldering peatlands of central Sumatra, some 300 kilometers away, and it drove the 3-hour PSI to Singapore to a record high of 401 on 21st June, higher than the previous record set in 226 in 1997. Residents here feared for their health. Visits to the NEA website peaked at 5 million that day, 5 million hits. All of us contributed to it because, like them, we were checking ever so often, every few minutes to see if the air quality was getting worse. The members of Parliament have asked if we were prepared for the haze threat, and if our emergency response and haze action plans were adequate. I would say that we've done reasonably well so far, but there are gaps that need to be plugged. Let me focus on the crucial issue of our national emergency plans, as it has wider and more important implications on our ability to respond to various crisis scenarios. And I think this is in fact what MPs are asking. If a subsequent crisis develops, much more severe than the haze, how prepared is Singapore? Government agencies have learned from our own experiences tackling national threats over the last decade or so. You remember them well. These preparations included events post 9/11 and the GI plot in 2001, SARS in 2003, H5N1 in 2004, H1N1 in 2009, and the Fukushima nuclear incident in 2011. In addition, we have incorporated painful lessons learned by others. Following the London bus bombings in July 2005 and the Mumbai terrorist attack in November 2008, our security agencies met up with the British and Indian officials actively involved in managing these crises. We gained a better understanding. We asked probing questions. We wanted to know how these attacks were carried out, how the security forces and public reacted, what measures were put in place in the aftermath of the attacks, what they considered they did well, what they could do better for us to learn. And these valuable learning points were used to enhance our own contingency plans. These experiences have resulted in a more robust whole-of-government organizational structures and response plans to deal with emergencies and contingencies affecting Singapore. Let me first talk on organizational structures. For the recent haze, the Interagency Haze Task Force, comprising 23 agencies, first met on 29th May of this year to prepare for the dry season, about 2 weeks before the haze actually hit us. As Mr. Chen pointed out, the Haze Task Force was first formed in 1994. Recognizing that the haze can recur, the task force is in effect activated yearly ahead of the dry season to review its procedures and responses and coordinate agencies' ground actions. It reports to the Crisis Management Group. crisis management groups, CMGs, were institutionalized since 2004 to handle specific threats when they escalate. For this Haze episode, the CMG Haze was stood up on 20th January this year. The CMGs report to the Homefront Crisis Executive Group made up of permanent secretaries of relevant ministries, chaired by the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Home Affairs. The Haze Interministerial Committee was convened by the Prime Minister on 20th June. The Prime Minister explained that the Interministerial Committee would, quote, oversee the overall national efforts, unquote, against the Haze. It included ministers from key ministries, MIO, MFA, MCI, MOH, MOE, MSF, and MOM. The Interministerial Committee was an added and new step, and one calibrated appropriately to deal with the Haze problem. For MPs' information, the apex organization structure to deal with national crisis is the Homefront Crisis Ministerial Team. It's chaired by Deputy Prime Minister Teo Chee Hean as Home Affairs Minister. The Homefront Crisis Ministerial Team was last activated in March 2011, in the aftermath of the Fukushima nuclear incident, because we felt the effects of the fallout on us could potentially have been serious. But the Haze is in no way a nuclear threat and did not warrant the HCMC. I want to assure Singaporeans that our structures to respond to national emergencies are in place and are functioning as intended. Let me now focus specifically on our overall response to the Haze, which members have asked about. The Interministerial Committee's focus was to protect public health and safety, work with Indonesians to mitigate the Haze at source, and maintain economic and social resilience. You've just heard the Minister from Foreign Affairs speak about our work with the Indonesian counterparts, and the Minister from Environment, MIO, will also share more on what we are doing. We are dependent on the Indonesians to solve the problem at source. In the meantime, we were determined not to let the Haze overwhelm us. We sought to minimize disruptions so that Singaporeans could carry on with their lives. The committee hoped that the way we responded would show how Singaporeans were united and resilient as a people, able to withstand the vicissitudes that life inevitably brings. To summarize, when the 3-hour PSI spiked at 401 on June 21st, there was a run on masks and even panic buying. We had more than enough masks in stock, but retailers encountered bottlenecks in distributing them and could not bring out masks fast enough to the outlets. The first task for the committee was to restore calm and protect the vulnerable. We therefore decided to give free N95 masks to some 200,000 low-income households. The SAF was called in to deliver the masks from the warehouses which MOH had stocked the masks to the 87 constituencies. Here, let me record that the People's Association grassroots network proved crucial and invaluable. The SAF could bring the masks to the constituencies, but whether you had the database, whether you had natural links that are formed, whether the grassroots leaders knew who the vulnerable and the poor, how to distribute them, we were very fortunate, in effect dependent on the PA grassroots network to be able to do this on such a large scale, 200,000 households across Singapore. At the same time, MOH pushed out another 3 million masks to retailers for the general public. With additional mask supply, the queues dissipated. And of course, if you remember, a sudden shift in wind directions on June 22nd, Saturday afternoon, cleared the Haze and helped tremendously. We also introduced various additional measures to help the public deal with the effects of the Haze. Prime Minister announced a scheme for those affected by the Haze to visit polyclinics or general practitioners, pay no more than $10 with government subsidizing the bill. MSF set up a fund to help childcare centers install air conditioning units. Ms. Penny Low asked about utility rebates for households if they had to spend more on the utilities because of the Haze. Thankfully, the period of severe Haze lasted only 2 days, and we already have in place various schemes that provide utility rebates. For example, the GST voucher, the USAVE payments, GST voucher U-Save payments will be disbursed this month to lower and middle income households living in HDB flats. The first half of the GSTV special payment announced during budget this year will also be disbursed this month. Eligible HDB households will receive between $135 and $195 worth of GSTV U-Save this month. Those living in smaller HDB flats will be able to offset between 2 to 3 months of utilities on average. At the same time, dealing with acute issues, all the ministries pressed on with their Haze action plans. The overall goal was to protect Singaporeans, and even if the Haze worsened, to quote, adjust, slow down, but not to stop, unquote. We examined all sectors in detail, paying particular attention to those vulnerable and working outdoors for long periods in our schools, childcare, kindergarten facilities, our VW homes, businesses with outdoor activities such as construction, logistics, shipyards, F&B, garbage disposals, cleaners, etc. We focus particularly on critical and essential services such as healthcare facilities, security operations, supply of power, water, fuel, food, banking and finance, postal, to ensure that Singapore would not seize up, even when the air quality turned hazardous. Mr. Sri Kumar and Mr. Lawrence Lien asked about the plans should the Haze return. These Haze action plans that we have gone through in detail, put up by all our ministries, will steer Singapore on and through the Haze when it returns. Ministries will continue to refine them as we go along, but I'm satisfied that the basic framework is sound and comprehensive. Mr. Teo Song Sing asked about compensation for businesses affected by the Haze. The National Business Continuity Management Program has been in place since 2008 to provide financial incentives to help companies attain Business Continuity Management certification. Interested companies can apply for support to the Singapore Business Federation. Many MPs have asked for an assessment of our efforts in communication, guidance and education during this Haze episode. I agree with them that this is one area we can improve on. During emergencies, perceived or real, lack of information or misinformation can often create greater problems than the threat itself. And I think this is what we saw in some measure during the panic mask buying, or during SARS, if you can remember it. When there is a threat, we need to give people more and timely information so that they are reassured, better informed about the risks, and can take precautions to protect themselves. And this is what we've been trying to do through this Haze episode. So since 20 June, NEA provided a daily health advisory for the next 24 hours, next day forecast, so that people could plan ahead. Prior to that, it was a historical measure. You see a figure of what had happened. We had feedback that says, well, that doesn't really help me that much. I want to know what to do ahead. So we pushed the experts, and they said, well, okay, we're comfortable to give a 24-hour next day forecast. After this, again responding to ground feedback, the Interministerial Committee tasked the NEA to update their forecast and advisory when conditions change during the day itself. And we did it the first time when, thankfully, when the PSI was actually much better than predicted. In the longer run, meteorologists at MEWR are looking actively to more accurately predict the risk of haze based on hotspots and climatic conditions, to provide early warning to Singaporeans. We all understand the difficulty in this. The winds and rains are fickle, but within those limits, an early warning system allows us more time to anticipate and act. To ensure that information is disseminated quickly, MIO has also set up a Haze website. I'm sure many of you have visited it. It's a one-stop and authoritative source of information online, and conducted daily briefings, technical briefings to the media. We've also recognized through this episode that not everyone wants or needs the same amount of information. Some want as much information as possible. In other words, name me all the X number of pollutants every hour, all the minutiae, and let me decide my life for myself. Others, on the other extreme, says, you're giving me too much. I just want to know what to do, whether I can go outdoors, do I need a mask or not. We have tried to meet the needs of different groups, and I'm gratified that Singaporeans have found an improvement in obtaining information. In a recent poll by Reach, 97% said that they could find the information they needed on the Haze. Nonetheless, we aim to give more useful, timely and authoritative information to Singapore. That surely must be an aim for any emergency exercise. So for the Haze, we've heard the feedback. We would certainly like to tell Singaporeans more precisely your health risk based on the exposure to specific air pollutants and how long you've been exposed to, or how they can mitigate or reverse these risks. And actually we do that in advisories against smoking, where the research is much more mature. We can't do that as confidently as for air pollutants until more reliable information is available. And our health advisories are guided by the panel of experts and the Ministry of Health based on the best evidence currently available. But where there is new information, we will push it out. Mr. Lian asked how we can harness the community's spirit to deal with the Haze. He's right. Resilience of the people must mean Singaporeans themselves taking the initiative to deal with the Haze and acting with calm and purpose. Two conditions: acting on your own with calm and purpose. I'm happy to report that Singaporeans did show resilience and community spirit. Whether it's the Haze this time, some mutated virus, or terrorist act the next, we need to respond to national threats together, whether as government, employers, unions, NGOs, or the community. And it was heartening to see Singaporeans rally together during the Haze. Project Awareness, SG Haze Rescue, the Halogen Foundation, and several other groups and individuals took the initiative to distribute masks to senior citizens and the less privileged. Mr. Lucien Teo distributed masks to residents of rental flats near his home and blogged, I quote him, "I'm so glad that I did this. I write this because I wish it for you too, that we might all step out a little and find ourselves a society worth living in and contributing to." Unquote. That we might all step out a little and find ourselves a society worth living in and contributing to. And many others did step out. There was a group of IT-savvy Singaporeans who created a crowdsourcing site to help people find N95 masks. They were thinking that the run could continue for a few days, so why don't you have a crowdsourcing app so that you know where to get it? Obviously, we stopped the run, but nonetheless, they went on to produce apps to provide up-to-date, easy-to-understand information on the PSI reading. Nobody told all these groups to do this, but they saw the need and spontaneously stepped up to help. Others deferred help to those who needed it more. Mr. Teo Salak shared how he met a young boy who told him, "Mr. Teo, you give this mask to others who need it. I'm going to stay home today." What a sensible young man. I'm talking about the boy, not Mr. Luck. A nation's spirit and our fortitude is shaped by crisis. As Jeremy Chua, a 25-year-old who started SG Haze Rescue, wrote on his Facebook page, quote, "It has been an incredibly inspiring week for me, working with a community of Singaporeans and PRs overseas and at home to make our country a bigger, bolder, and better one. A bigger, bolder, and better one." He goes on, "I am humbled by the volunteers and donors who have contributed time, effort, money, and whatever they could. They embody the new Singapore story. In a crisis, there is no public-private divide. We are an entire community together in this." Unquote. MPs rightly ask, can Singapore withstand the next national threat, the next big one even more severe? I believe so, but only if we maintain the trust and care for one another. Trust and care between leaders and the people, and for each other. Our collective response during this Haze, where Singaporeans came together, trusted and cared for each other, adds to my confidence. More importantly, we should ask, are Singaporeans themselves confident of getting through emergencies? Because that's what counts. In this Haze episode, around 80% of residents polled said that they were confident that Singapore will get through the haze and that Singapore is doing its best, that the government is doing its best to tackle the haze. These are polls conducted every day that there was around the haze, collated, and 80% said that they were confident that Singapore would get through it and that the government is doing its best to tackle the haze. This is a good sign, and the government will work hard to maintain that confidence. Together, we will look after each other and get through all national threats to Singapore.